Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Employee Engagement Webcast. I am Jason Lortzen, your host for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm thankful that you joined us today. For those of you that don't know me, I make most of my living as a keynote speaker, author, and occasional consultant. I am interested in all things employee engagement and am a geek about that sort of thing. So I'm excited to be here with you and to bring this conversation with you or to you this month. For those that, if this is your first time joining, each month I try to bring you a guest who can make us, who can inspire us or challenge us and certainly make us smarter about employee engagement and all the work around that topic so that then we can take that back and go to work on making our own workplace a more engaging place for our people. And so before we kick off, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Shindig. Shindig is the beautiful platform that you are experiencing right now, the technology you're using to join us today. Shindig is a platform that's designed, as I learned it, I've been really intrigued. It's a platform designed to simulate being together in person, like you're at an event or at a company meeting together, but doing it online. And so there's lots of functionality to allow for interaction. And so for those of you that joined that maybe you're a little shy and didn't turn on your video camera, don't worry, it's too late, or it's not too late. You can use the little settings icon wheel up in the upper right hand corner to enable your video if you'd like. After Aaron and I get through the first part of our conversation, we'll open it up for questions. One of the really cool things that you can do is you can raise your hand and I will pop you up on screen and you can ask your question in person. Or if you have a comment for us, you can make that in person. And we love having those face-to-face questions. So I encourage you to do that. If you don't have a video camera or you are like working from home in your pajamas today and you just don't want us to see you, that's totally cool. You can also ask questions using the question feature. You can type them in. I will see those when you do that, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And I certainly hope and invite you to ask all of the questions you can. Challenge us. Ask us the questions that'll help you apply what we're talking about today to your own work or to your own life. For those of you that want to that are on the Twitters, as the kids say. I don't think they say that, but if you're on Twitter and you want to engage in the conversation there, the hashtag is EEWebcast. That's hashtag EEWebcast. Feel free to tag there or Facebook or wherever you like to start a conversation. So I think that's all of my background. Again, thanks for joining. Let me bring my guest to the stage. And as I'm doing that, I will start to introduce him. I'm super excited to have Aaron Hurst with me today. I originally came to know about Aaron's work by way of a mutual friend of ours, Ben's Communication. A beautiful human being, one of my favorite people, had told me about Aaron's work a number of years ago, and then finally we connected, I guess, somewhat recently as our work sort of intersected. But Aaron is a lot of things. His bio is a very cool mixture of things. He's a social entrepreneur, an expert on purpose at work, which is obviously what we're going to spend some time talking about. He is the author of The Purpose Economy. I encourage you to check that out. We're going to talk about that. He's the founder of the Taproot Foundation and the CEO and founder of his current company, Imperative, which you'll learn about later in our conversation today. But Aaron, thank you so much for joining. I'm thrilled to have you here.
No, it's great to be here, and I've loved getting to know the Shindig app. It is really a cool way to do meetings, and the team has been so great about facilitating. So exciting to experiment with it.
Well, and the thing that as people, those of you that are joining us, and this is your first time interacting with it, I think what we're doing with it today is just scratching the surface. It's a cool way for us to have conversations, but I think the real power of this is when you can bring it, in-house into a team or an organization where you can facilitate being together in a way that's a lot more interactive, I think. So I'm glad you're
If you don't
here.
mind, it brings more purpose to work.
There you go.
There you go.
We're already ahead of the game. So let me start with you on this, because I think I tend to like to know, as a parent of kids that are perfect sort of Marvel superhero age, I like to know people's origin stories. And so I'd like to, do you, as you think about your background, and now, you do all of this work with purpose and a variety of really awesome stuff there, but take us back to where was the initial spark for you, that sort of lit, or sort of was the first indicator of what your superpower might one day be? Like, how far back does it go that you became to be interested or curious about purpose?
Yeah, I love that, also the sort of that origin story frame. It's a hard question to answer because there's sort of the entrepreneur piece and there's the purpose piece. I started my first business when I was 16, and I've always loved being an entrepreneur and creating value. And I think a lot of that actually comes psychologically out of my mother had very severe depression and had a really hard time getting out of bed when I was a child, and never really was able to take care of herself. And for me, like taking care of her and my sister and myself, I really became strongly a believer in how do we help people get out of bed? How do we help people better care for their families, for their teams, et cetera? I think that at some level was like the origin of this work, is realizing that until people can get out of bed, they're not able to live their lives. They're not able to make an impact. And my mom was an amazing person, ultimately died about 20 years ago, in large part because she was never able to break that. So a lot of this work to me is about, helping, solve for that childhood need of helping my mother get out of bed and helping people really understand not only that they have a role to make a difference in the world, but also that the world needs them to and is waiting for them to do that. So that was sort of the earliest origin. I've done work in prisons, helping inmates around this. I've done work in high schools and college, but I think the real sort of professional catalyst was starting the Taproot Foundation and trying to really help business professionals realize that, HR, marketing, tech, HR, these fields are not just about commercial impact, that actually each of them provides an incredible transformational power, and helping people see that by using those skills to do pro bono work for nonprofits, it could help them really see their work in a radically different way.
So talk about that journey. I guess I'm curious. So how did you find your way to, the 16-year-old entrepreneur kind of through to the Taproot Foundation, and talk a little bit more about like what that is and how that came to be? Because I think, at least as I understand it, that's a pretty important part of how you came to really unpack the true significance and power of purpose, if I understand your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it started, I went to the University of Michigan and built a program there when I was a college student around having students go out to local correctional facilities, prisons, and teaching creative writing, working with inmates. And did that for several years, and it was very successful in getting people to think more about not just like sociology or creative writing, but seeing it all interconnected as the world really is. But what really struck me as I followed inmates over a couple of years was that once someone's in prison, it's really hard to restart that life. It's really hard to fix. And that the real opportunity was getting to people before they were in prison. So when I graduated from college, I went to work in inner city education in Chicago at DePaul University and the Chicago Foundation for Education. And what they were doing was so inspiring to me around trying to really help kids have a brighter future, to see early on how to get on the right path. But what I saw was that these organizations that had such great vision, such an incredible mission, had already developed a poverty mentality around the scope of change they could actually make. They saw this vision up here, but they were operating down here, and they'd given up on the ability to get up to that level. And I realized that they were suffering from a cycle that was the same cycle the people they were serving were suffering from, or they weren't resourced properly and therefore weren't able to have the dreams to actually activate on those, and wanted to learn how businesses, especially startups, are able to do that. So I moved out, I quit that field, and moved to the Bay Area back in 97, and worked in 2 startups with the goal of trying to figure out how is it these startups are scaling and going from like crazy vision to actually like making major progress towards that. And what I realized was that, yes, money was a huge part of that, but a lot of it was about the fact that these startups brought on functional talent before they needed it to build, sort of to pave the road before they got there, if that makes sense. They brought in senior marketing, technology, HR, finance people, whereas the nonprofits usually brought them in 10 years after they needed them, not 2 years before they needed them. And this is what was enabling a lot of that scaling. And I realized that there was a fundamental problem where the world is increasingly technical, and yet nonprofits were priced out of these fields, and realized there was an opportunity to figure out how to stop just doing volunteerism as it's done now, which is usually not very high impact. But actually, when you ask nonprofits, okay, we've got a business, they're willing to help you. What do you need? They say, I need a new website. I need a new HR policy. I need help with our finances. I need to set up a donor database. And I was like, that's actually the stuff that's most needed and the things that will create the transformation. And Taproot was founded to that end. Like, how do we build a movement around not just doing volunteering, but actually using our skills for social impact the way lawyers have for decades, right? And Taproot ultimately scaled to be a catalyst of a $15 billion a year marketplace in the US around pro bono service, and was working with, all the leading companies, working with the White House, and then ultimately scaled around the world. There's now Taproot affiliates all around the world, from China to Costa Rica, that are using the same ethic around it. And what ultimately sparked Imperative was I saw that people who were doing pro bono work were saying it was the most rewarding experience of their careers and so much more meaningful than their day job. And at first we were like, that's freaking awesome, right? Like, we had created Disneyland for work. But then I realized that's exactly what we had done. We created Disneyland for work. We hadn't fixed the problem. We created a Disneyland. And with the exception of a few creepy people, no one lives at Disneyland, right? We have to figure out how to solve the real problem itself. And that in some ways, pro bono work was enabling the problem. So it was creating a way to have a supplement instead of having a healthy meal. And wanted to figure out, how do we take everything we'd learned from doing pro bono work with millions of people and actually figure out how to turn that on in people's day-to-day jobs and change work itself. And that's really the birth of Imperative and the work we're doing now.
Got
I'll
it.
pause there. Been too long.
That's well, it's a great story, and I think it's a great evolution, and it brings, I think it connects to sort of the one of the bigger, I guess, points that, or I guess things that arguments you make with your book, is that we're experiencing kind of a transition in our economy to, broadly moving to what you're calling a purpose economy. So beyond the, I'm assuming that that sort of came out of some of your observations of people realizing, like, wow, when I get to go do this thing, it makes me feel really great about work, but that there's something broader going on. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So the information economy, right, which is the one that we sort of talk about a lot. Actually, my uncle back in the 70s coined that term when he was at Stanford as an economist there. And, looking at his work and how he saw us moving from an industrial to an information economy, some of the changes, the canaries that sort of indicated that change, I saw the same things happening, about 5 or 10 years ago, where we started seeing a real shift in where innovation was happening and what people were prioritizing. So as you started to look at, the information economy was about efficiency and scale, right? And it was about the ability to, process ungodly amounts of information, and it led to an incredible amount of innovation. But a lot of where innovation has been happening over the last 5 or 10 years has been about using that capability, but to enable us to get back to what we need at a more biological level, because the information economy pushed us out of, I would say, a healthy biological relationship. We're now addicted to smartphones. We're now spending a lot of time doing things that actually aren't good for us. And people were starting to say, you know what, I really want human relationships again. I really want to feel like I'm making an impact and doing something that matters. And I want to be growing as a human being. And we saw that a lot of the innovations, whether it was in entertainment, whether it was in healthcare, whether it was in retail, was around how do we bring, relationships impacting growth to that experience. And then on the talent side, hearing employees increasingly saying, you know what, I want to be part of something where I have real authentic relationships, where I feel like my work matters, and where I'm constantly growing. And this was all based on that same biological urge that we have. And this was changing employment behavior and purchasing behavior. And that's really the core thesis of the book.
So I guess just to be clear, we're going to talk a lot about purpose today. I want to make sure that we're clear about when when you talk about it, what you mean. You hint at the
Sure.
relationship impact and growth. Can you talk a little bit more about what purpose means in your context?
Yeah. So purpose is basically our intrinsic motivation. So if you think about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, extrinsic is like pay, it's making your parents happy, it's doing what the boss says. Intrinsic motivation is the stuff that you actually want to do because it comes from who you are as a person and a manifestation of how you want to show up in the world. And that's really your purpose. It's about who do you want to serve, it's about your values, and it's about how you want to make a difference, your superpower, to use your Marvel metaphor. And that's really like what defines you and how you want to show up. It's not your personality. It's not necessarily like these traditional work models. It's really about more fundamentally, like what is the contribution you want to make in the world and where. How that manifests is around your relationships, your impact, and your growth. Those are the ways in which that sort of shows up in a workplace and in your life. So if you want to measure whether or not someone's working with purpose, you don't measure their purpose, you measure the strength of their relationships, impact, and growth, which we together talk about as their fulfillment. How fulfilled is someone? And our favorite way of thinking about that, Jason, is think about like you're on your deathbed 100 years from now, because I know you're going to live a very long time. And you're sort of looking back at your life and saying, was this a life well lived, right? And what are the questions people ask on their deathbed? And it's those three questions. Did I have meaningful relationships with people? Did I leave the world in some way better than I found it? And did I grow? And I think grow is largely about, did I live life to its fullest, or did I operate more out of fear and have regrets? Did I challenge myself? Did I grow? Did I push myself? Or am I like, you know what? I was a coward in my life and I never really pushed myself. And I believe that same set of questions we ask on our deathbed are the ones we should ask every day when we go to work and every day when we come home. Did I have strong relationships today? Did I make an impact, and did I grow? Because that's biologically like what really matters.
Got it. So this brings me to, I think, the reason that I immediately wanted to have you on this on the conversation here is that in our conversation we had a month or two ago,
Yeah.
we got into it, and I started talking about the work I'm doing in employee engagement, and you started trying to talk me out of of categorizing my work as employee engagement, and then you sent me some articles where you had made the case that employee engagement has failed, and so I want to have this conversation because I love the perspective that you bring, and
Yeah.
we can kind of get into this. But tell me a little bit about, first, before we get into
Yeah.
why you argue that employee engagement has failed. When you say that, when you're talking about employee engagement in this context, what are you talking about? Are you talking about the idea of engagement? Is it the practice of engagement? Is it how we go about it? What are you talking about when you make that argument that it's failed?
So I think employee engagement, and I say it's failed. I think the reality is it's hit a wall. I think it has moved the conversation forward, but we've hit a wall in terms of its ability to move us to the next level. I use the word failed. I think it's a more dramatic way of framing it, but I think what ultimately we're saying is it's hit a wall, right? And I look at that in the context of history, and a lot of like what engagement's about is not wrong. I think it's when you look at the historical roots of it, it was not set up for success from the get-go because it's based on old models of work. So if you don't mind, I'd love to just share with you a little bit of that history because I think it gives you a real perspective on this. So
Sure.
you sort of think about Jason the caveman, right? Hundreds of thousands of years ago in your cave with your family or what have you. There was no such thing as work, right? Like there wasn't work. There was, I'm hungry, I better get some food. The baby's crying, I better help the baby. But there wasn't a manager and there wasn't work. So I think we have to begin with the idea that from a biological standpoint, work is a human construct. It's not actually sort of a thing. And just understand that as a beginning place, right?
Sure.
I think the second piece is, as the agrarian economy started and people started settling down, people started having farms, what we saw was power was defined based on who owned land. So if Jason was a king, he owned land. And if he was a serf, if he wanted food, he had to do whatever the hell the king told him to do, or he didn't eat. And that was sort of the start of management, if you will, right?
Sure.
It was, and you farm my land and give me food, or you don't have food. And that was sort of that dynamic from the get-go. It was driven by who owns the land. So at that point, the idea of like measuring workforce is basically like, who cares? Like you eat or you don't eat. right? It was a pretty binary relationship.
Sure.
We then moved into the industrial economy, right? Where you start having factories and raw materials start becoming, a major part. It's not just land. It's about, do you have access to petroleum? Do you have access to rubber? Do you have access to, all the raw materials? And then we started building cities. We started having factories. And something happened that was pretty revolutionary, which is we saw the rise of unions. And it was the first time that employees really sort of said, you know what, no, we don't have any power as individuals, but collectively we actually do have some power, and we can create a work stoppage, which for the factory owners was a major economic problem. And one of the things Henry Ford realized was that you could measure employee satisfaction as a canary to figure out, am I getting close to the point where Jason and all the other workers are going to go on strike and I'm going to have a real problem? So it became a way of being able to determine, are we moving towards the point of the workers rebelling and actually causing trouble? And how can we just always make sure we're not sort of crossing that line? We then moved into the information economy. And in the information economy, so we went from land being the source of power to raw materials being the source of power to actually human beings for the first time being the source of productivity, right? Like the software developer becomes the resource, and the role of the laborer is no longer to process the thing that's owned by, the boss, but actually they had the power because they were the means of production. So we said, you know what, the satisfaction stuff, it doesn't really measure what that person, like the output of that person. With a farm, we want to measure how many turnips, we could grow. With manufacturing, we want to figure out how many cars we could get out per day and what it cost. But we want to figure out with the information economy is, what is the productivity per person? Because the person now is the means of production. And employee engagement, as it's technically defined, is about discretionary effort. Can we get someone to do more work than we're paying them for, right? And it's a management-based philosophy on how do we maximize output per head. And it doesn't mean there's not a lot of good ideas that came in there around, like, we need to make work more valuable. We need to figure out what causes someone to be more productive. But it still has some fundamental assumptions baked into it that I think make it challenging. One is that it starts off with a hierarchical mindset around production and around this idea that management needs to help these, headcount produce. The second is it still starts to a large degree with the assumption that work is a non-desirable bad thing. And it's how do we make work suck less, instead of realizing that actually work is a major source of fulfillment when it's done properly. And looking at it and flipping the script and saying, no, work is important. How do we make the most of it? Not how do we make work suck less? I think those two things in of themselves, and because it came from the same roots of basically serfs and slavery to, workers in factories to then how do we get the most out of our software developers? It never flipped the script and actually said, wait a sec, maybe work itself is a noble thing and not just a means to an end. And I think that's where I say it's like hit a wall. We need to flip the script. Does that follow?
No, I think what we ultimately realized in the conversation that we had was that I think we both agreed that it had hit a wall. It's just that I think we had a difference of opinion about replace versus redefine or whatever.
Yep.
But semantics is fun to talk about, but it doesn't help us actually improve the workplace. And so if engagement has failed, then what is an organization to do? Is it, do you abandon your efforts? Do you replace it with something else? Do you tweak? Like what do you recommend organizations do next if they're facing stalled out practices around engagement?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think one is really looking at the research around purpose and how we're seeing this. And actually, EY just came out with a great study this week around purpose and how it's really enabling organizational agility, how it's really maximizing people's sense of fulfillment. And I think we have to begin with the sort of premise that going forward, an organization needs a purpose, and a profit's not a purpose, right? It needs to be a purpose that fundamentally adds value to the world, and it is like a net value creator for the world. And when you start with that premise, then we also have to think about every job that way and think about, how are we helping people truly be fulfilled in their work, to actually go home more whole than when they came to work that day? How are we helping grow people? How are we helping people realize their potential in the world and see work not as a means to an end, but actually in and of itself something that's valuable. We're doing a lot of work right now with people with severe disabilities. And it's really interesting for them. It's not so much about the money and being able to have a job. It's about the fact that work is actually a core part of what gives us a sense of self and a sense of dignity. And seeing work through that lens, I think is a really big shift. So whether we call it engagement, call it fulfillment, call it monkeys, call it whatever the hell we want to call it, I think a big part of it is changing the narrative about what the role of work is and the role of organizations are, that it's about purpose and it's about personal fulfillment. And that's sort of that broader change that's necessary. I think the challenge with engagement is it tends to be tied to an old narrative, which is not about work as a noble thing. And that's the piece I'm trying to detach from and figure out what's required to create that break in the thinking.
Yep. So one of the things that I found interesting, as I've been interviewing organizations and leaders, as I've been writing my book, I talked to one of your clients even, that one of the things I find is when we talk about purpose exists on a couple levels, and you even just hinted at it there. There's the organizational purpose, which is why does the organization exist and how do we have an impact in the world? Then there's my purpose as an individual employee, what drives me or motivates me, what, sort of that superpower inside of me. If someone's listening to this and they're thinking about, okay, I need to, we want to do something with purpose, where do you start? What's most important, or what do you think, what's the balance between those two?
Well, they're both needed. It's interesting, that EY study, they found that when an organization just worked on organizational purpose and they didn't bring it down, it actually had a net negative effect, because it actually had employees not have confidence in the company because they don't feel like it's authentic. So they both really need to, can't just do one or the other. If you just do individual purpose and the organization doesn't have one, people start to really feel like there's something missing. And if you just do organizational without integrating it, people feel like it's just PR and spin. So it's really important to bring them together. What we see as a best practice is the organization works to really identify what is the why of the organization. What is the social value it creates in the world? Why does it exist beyond profit? So that's a really important process. And it's not something you just do in a one-time brainstorm, but it's really about engaging as you're going through that, right?
Yep.
And then
technical difficulties, everyone. Bear with us for a second.
Jason,
see if we can get Aaron back. While we're waiting on that, or while we're working on getting him back, I'd like to remind you that if you have questions, or if you think you're thinking of, you have some burning questions, please feel free to enter questions, or if you know you're going to want to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand so that I can call on you here in a few minutes. We're going to get to questions probably in about 5 or 10 minutes. So, Aaron, welcome back. Back to you.
Yeah, I did that to make sure you can make that announcement, so I appreciate it.
All right, thank you for that.
Glad that was helpful. No, so I was just trying to, I don't know where I got cut off, but I was trying to share, you need that organizational purpose defined, and then you need to help each person uncover what their personal why is, what is their purpose. And that's where I work at Imperative. We've basically developed data science around that so that you can predict what someone's purpose is psychologically. And we've been rolling this out with hundreds of thousands of people at different companies, helping people uncover what their purpose is. And then we work with the organization to actually map the organization's purpose to the individuals. Because when we thrive, it's when we're operating at the Venn diagram, sort of that intersection between individual and organizational purpose. So helping someone realize that, if my purpose is ABC and the company's is XYZ, where does that come together? And how do I show up and activate that every day? And then how do you as a team activate that? So it's really building that into every level and moving away from a mindset around, personality or strengths, and more into one around purpose.
Got it. Well, we kind of alluded at it a little bit here, that in talking about what you're doing, can you talk a little bit about, talk a little bit about Imperative, because I think I was really intrigued in talking to you about how you have, because at least in my experience, there's a lot of conversation about purpose. I hear people talk about it, and I think there's a general sense that an awareness of its importance, even in the workplace, or leaders understand that purpose is important. We kind of have this sense of it, but I really appreciate how you've operationalized this. And so, can you talk a little bit more about the company and how it works
Yep.
and kind of what you're doing, and then I have some questions about practical application for people.
No, happy to. So, never hard to talk about my love. So, I'm happy to do that. So, what I saw in writing The Purpose Economy and doing research was there are incredible people out there like the Authentic Leadership Institute, Simon Sinek, others that are doing what I would call the poetry of purpose and helping people come up with sort of their purpose statement, right? Um, it's brilliant, but it fails in two sort of key ways. One is it's not scalable. So generally you can afford to do that for your top execs. You can't do that for your frontline employees, and yet they're the ones that often need it. So we were basically creating an elitism around purpose, not intentionally, I don't criticize them, but just that poetry-based model doesn't scale. The second is it wasn't data-driven. So if you and I were both to go through an awesome, like Simon Sinek purpose statement development exercise, write some glorious poetry, and then input it into our HR system, the HR system would basically be like words. I have no idea what to do with what you just wrote. And therefore, there's no way of integrating purpose into an HR or talent system because it couldn't talk to it. So what we've been focused on at Imperative is how do we create a sort of understand, if we looked at 1,000 different purpose statements developed through a Simon Sinek or through Stephen Covey, what are we seeing are actual psychological patterns that underpin all of that? And therefore, if we can identify those psychological drivers, we can actually then predict what someone would write in a purpose statement, but behind it be able to define what is the psychology behind that, which then also enables us to see how are Aaron and Jason's purpose similar or different? What kinds of ways should someone with that purpose look to develop their career? What are ways they should volunteer? How should they set goals? What do they look like on a team? And suddenly you're able to basically create a data science that can scale so that it's low cost enough that every employee can use it, and so that it can talk to HR systems so that we can suddenly do performance reviews using it. We can do development plans based on it. We can develop volunteer programs based on it. We can start to do things with purpose that before were just frankly impossible. And that's really been where our journey has been, is figuring out how to integrate that. Now that we have the data, how do we integrate that into the key talent lifecycle so that we can build HR systems around purpose, not around people as utilities?
Got it. So you had given a great example when we were chatting about how, because I think this is, I mean, regardless of, hopefully you have some tools or some ways to help people clarify purpose, but you have some sense of purpose on an individual level. You had shared an example about, like, for example, how you can use purpose to make goals more meaningful, to create more of an intrinsic pull on the goal. Can you talk about, give an example of how that looks in actual practice?
Absolutely. So when a goal is aligned with our purpose, it becomes personally meaningful versus just sort of generic. And I'll give you an example that I love that's sort of out of the HR space. I was doing a session for a bunch of people who are working in benefits, and they were focused especially on folks who were helping with mostly mothers that were going on maternity leave. And we had people that had 3 different elevations of impact that they cared about, right? And this is one of the key aspects of purpose. Some people gain meaning helping individuals, and they need to feel like their work actually helps someone. Other people want to make an impact much more at a team or organizational level. And some people are more interested in sort of making an impact at a societal level. And those are actually different psychological profiles that cause us to care from a purpose standpoint about each of those levels. So let's take the example of 3 people, and these are actual people, who all have the exact same job, which is about helping mothers returning to work or planning for their maternity leave inside their organizations. How are they doing that, and why does that matter? So for the individual person, talking to her, she was like, you know what, every mother I help, I realize how stressful this is for them. How are they going to be able to reintegrate into work? How are they going to be able to balance this? This is especially for first-time mothers so stressful. And if I can just make that a little less stressful for that person, I've really made an impact in their lives. Makes sense, right? Like, that's very authentic. The organization person, what he said was, I love, helping the mothers, but what really gets me excited is thinking about the team they're on. How can that team continue to do well when someone's going to have to be out for a while? How do we plan for that? How do we make sure they're successful as a team? And how can we as an organization make sure we're a place where parents want to work so that we're competing for the best talent and making this organization one where people want to work That's what really gets me fired up, that we're creating an organization that's set up for success. And then I talked to the woman who's more at that societal level, right? And she said, yes, it's great to help each person. Yes, it's great to help the organization. But at the end of the day, I go home feeling like, you know what? I'm in some small way making the workforce a better place for women and parents to work in. And I'm part of this broader change in society. And that's what gets me excited. It's not our organization or any one individual. It's knowing that I'm part of making history. And that really changes the dynamic. Because if I had told that last person, you know, it's all about the individual, she'd be like, yeah, that's like, yes. But like, it didn't give her like that fired up emotional sense. And when we can understand where someone is in terms of their purpose, we can actually take the same work and supercharge it with purpose just by changing the frame of how we think about it. Does that follow for you?
It does. It does. So if you're going to activate that, one of the things you talk about in the book is an idea called job crafting, where sort of shaping or sort of using an understanding of purpose to shape people's actual jobs. Can you explain what that looks like? So it's sort of the next step, because right there's the motivational conversation that you talked about, but then this is the next step of actively shaping work so that it connects more deeply.
No, and I love this. So the way I've been talking about it recently has been around comparing it to software development, which at first is like, what the hell is the connection between these two things? But let me explain what that means. I actually come out of technology. So when I started in the 90s working in Silicon Valley, the way we developed software was called a waterfall method, right? And the basic idea is like you spend a long time working on something and then you have you ship it and it's like this huge cascading change that's made. And then you continue working for a long time on something and then you have the next release, right? So these huge releases. And that's basically how we've approached careers, is that we do the same thing and then we have these giant changes. We get promoted, we go to another job, but we treat these like major changes as the way we approach work. What we found in software, which is the same thing we found with careers, is that that's not a great model. What happened in software is we realized it's better to look at it almost like in a 2-week sprint, where we're saying, here's what we want to have the software accomplish. Let's every 2 weeks try and experiment on something and see if it makes the product more effective, and just constantly tweak and experiment until we get to something better. Let's not just do these huge bets, let's do little bets. And this is the core idea behind job crafting, job tailoring, whatever you want to call it, is applying agile to your career. So what we do on the platform is we have people every week measure their fulfillment. To what degree do you feel like you have strong relationships at work? To what degree do you feel like you're making an impact? To what degree do you feel like you're growing? And then also identify, what are you trying to do right now? Are you generally focused on being a better leader? Did you just start a new job? Like, what's your situation that you're working towards? And then we also know their profession and we know their purpose type. So each week as they score that, we're throwing out to them tested, proven, small experiments they could try that we've seen other people like them have success with. We then have them try that week. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. We're getting data on it so that every time our system's getting smarter, we're learning more about that person. And we're helping them make small changes where they're taking ownership of their career. They're constantly experimenting and building self-awareness, and they're crafting their job on a weekly basis, which makes them more adaptable, makes them more accountable to their own work. And we really think that's the future of work, is much more of that model than this sort of stepped sort of waterfall model.
Sure, sort of constant iteration.
Constant iteration, and how do we learn about that platform? Like, how do we learn about people who are similar from each other, so that we're building the intelligence of the crowd to help each person realize their potential.
Cool. Well, let me again. I'll invite the audience to submit some questions. If you don't, then I'm going to keep asking my questions because I have plenty. But if anybody wants to raise their hand and jump up on stage with us to ask a question, I have one. Somebody just raised their hand.
It's
exciting. Let's do it here. Hold on. Brooke, I'm coming to you.
We love Brooke.
We love Brooke. We love Brave. Hey, Brooke, welcome.
Hi, Jason. Hi, Aaron. Hi from San Diego. Yes, so I've been following both of you. It's so exciting to see both of you over here. I've seen you, Jason, as a speaker. I don't know where, but I listen to so many people. And Aaron, because I'm a P person, I was first very interested in passion, but I thought purpose is so much more important than passion. So when I'm thinking about purpose, of course, it's not so hard to find Imperative and Ernst & Young Beacon Institute, and I've been using your research forever. So thanks for all of that. And of course, and I didn't bring it because I'm going to see you today. I didn't even know we were going to be on video, but this is my favorite book with all my notes in it. But I was even tagging you on Twitter. Thanks for all you do and being a trailblazer, because I so agree with everything you say. I can't tweet all of that. But I think like people who are on this call and people who are interested in purpose like me, do you have any thoughts about like how can we join some of these forces, this passion and purpose we all have to make the workplace a more purposeful place? Like I'm following you and I'm doing everything I can. I'm going to give a speech soon, and I put notes from your talk even today, which I'm going to use with your permission. But like, what can we do, people like me who believe exactly what you're saying, and we're not at this stage of imperative? What can we do? Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, it's great. Well, thanks for all that encouragement. It made my day. So thank you for that.
No, of course.
So Brooke, I think the first thing is just start with yourself is always the place I say, which is make sure you're regularly measuring relationships, impacting growth in your life, that you're leading by example in that work. That's the most important sort of first step. And then I think it's about, the people you care about and how are you helping ask them the challenging questions and helping them see inside themselves, like who they truly are and celebrating that about them. And then I think it's about asking hard questions that don't allow leaders off the hook around seeing work as something more than just about being a paycheck. And I'll give you an example of one of my favorite questions that I sort of push towards CEOs when I work with them. I find a lot of times leaders create jobs that they would not have a member of their family take. And I think this is one of the first sort of signs that someone is not actually understanding this work. If you're a CEO and you create a job that you wouldn't have a relative or a friend of yours take, you've done something that's fundamentally against your values and that dishonors work. So just challenging a leader to say, how many jobs do you have in your organization that you would not want one of your kids or a nephew to take? And it may not be the right fit for them, but are you creating jobs that you consider to be for them instead of for us? And the second you start creating that us and them paradigm, you're headed down the wrong road. But most companies I know have us and them jobs. And I think that's the start where a lot of this problem happens, is as soon as you do that, you're letting yourself off the hook as a leader from having the accountability of your own values and your purpose and saying it's okay because those people just need work and they'll put up with anything. And I've heard even like what seem to be enlightened leaders with that mindset. So I think just challenging people around that question of how do we make sure every job is designed for our kids, right? Makes it incredible. And Jason, if anyone is on the call, like really wants to do that personal investment work in themselves and is interested, I'm happy to donate a seat on our platform. If people just email me at aaron@imperative.com and put in the subject line, I choose purpose. If you tell me you choose purpose, I want to support you. So shoot me an email and I'm happy to send you an invite. And if you want to get on the phone, happy to talk about your own journey, because we need people out there that are, shining a light on human potential. Because at the end of the day, I mean, Jason, you mentioned you have kids. I have kids. I see them as our boss. We can't have work be the same when they enter the workforce as it was for us. And we've got to figure out, it's going to take all of us being courageous to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Brooke.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome question. I feel like we should pay Brooke after the endorsement there.
Absolutely.
It feels appropriate to me. I actually wanted, I don't know if anyone has any other questions, you raise your hands or toss them at me. I had another one that I wanted to throw at you that you just kind of hinted at, which is you have written about that this has to start with kids. It has to start in schools. It has to, we need to change the narrative about purpose starting very young. And you talked about specifically, you should be having this conversation around your dinner table with your kids. So what does that look like? Help us understand, for those of us that are parents or that are around kids or care about this, what kinds of things should we be doing and what kinds of conversations should we be having with our kids to get them oriented towards a different way of thinking about purpose?
No, absolutely. I think it's actually about having them think about work in a different way. a lot of what we found is it has less to do with your job or your manager or what organization you're at. It has to do with the psychological framing of the role work should play in your life. And a lot of people are raised to think about work in the wrong way, and therefore it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's about helping develop the narrative about the role of work in their lives that's so important. And it's a lot of like body image, right? We know as parents, I don't know if you have girls, I have a girl, there's a real sensitivity to all the crappy messages that especially girls get about body and what their relationship with their body should be and how dysfunctional that is. The thing to be self-aware about in that case is what are the media messages they're seeing and what are you doing as a parent to actually make that worse or better? And the same thing is true of how kids are cognitively developing a model for the role of work in their lives. So think about when you're at the dinner table, how are you talking about work? It's easy after a long day to come home and bitch and moan about work, right? But what message are you sending your kids about work, right? How are you talking about your relationships at work? How are you talking about the impact your job has? How are you talking about your growth? How are you helping them see that work is a source of fulfillment? Because at the end of the day, the message that I have to work and that's the reason I'm away from you because of the money, and basically I'm trading time with you for an economic value is a really crappy message. The message is saying, look, work is fulfilling for me. The reason I put a lot of time into this is, yes, I got to pay the mortgage, but I have friends at work. I'm doing work that matters to people. I'm growing. It's just like you are at school. Like I have friends, I have impact, I have that growth. And like really helping think about how are you developing a narrative about work? And then similarly, as you look at it, start watching the TV programs that they look at, start looking at the media that they have and realize a lot of it is sending a very negative message about work. Think about like The Simpsons, which I know is a little bit of a dated reference, but something like The Simpsons is like nonstop work sucks, right? So much of the media portrays work as this horrible thing, just like it portrays women should be skinny and have large boobs. It portrays like all these things that are horrible for self-esteem. We're doing the same thing in media with work. So as a parent, really think about what is the message you want your kids to hear and how are you, through yourself and the media they have, reinforcing that? And the final thing I'll say is more than half the teachers in America are not purpose-oriented. They don't see their work first and foremost about purpose. They just see it as a job. And as long as we have teachers that are reinforcing that when kids are spending time with them, that's really hurting as well. So one of the key areas we need to invest in is how do we get teachers that are there for the right reasons? So you can tell
Awesome.
I can talk about that forever. I get pretty fired up.
Yeah, no, that's well, and I think it's awesome. I love that. I love that line of thinking. My wife and I are both self-employed, and so we often joke that our children might be totally unemployable by the time they get there, just because that nothing will make sense to them in terms of what work in the traditional sense looks like. So as we close up, I want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, the impact that you're having on, the narrative about work and the experience that people are having. It matters. It matters to people. I can tell you from having a conversation with one of your clients, and I'm sure it's reflective of many. It's a real thing. They believe that through their commitment to purpose and your help, they're changing the lives of their employees and impacting their community. So it's really meaningful work. Thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your story with my audience. I appreciate it.
It's a total honor, and I love that you're out there pushing this. And I think we have to, whether it's our kids, our clients, employees, like we need to expect more, and when we expect more happens. So I think this is complete within reach. We just have to continue to believe in ourselves, believe we're worth it, believe everyone's worth it, and the change will happen.
Awesome. So remind people what they need to do if they're inspired to connect with you to start on themselves and get clear on their own purpose. They need to email you. So remind them on the email and what to put in the email and where to find more about Imperative.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you send me an email in the next 24 hours to Aaron, Aaron, @imperative.com, and just put in the subject line, I choose purpose, I will have someone on the team send you a free seat for this year to our platform so you can get to know your own purpose. And if you have specific questions you wanted to chat with me about, feel free to throw those in the email as well. But we're here to support you. We want to help you have the courage to make the difference for yourself, for the people you care about, and the people in your community.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I hope people will go. Will take you up on that. I know that it was really interesting for me to do my own profile. I learned about myself. Helps just some things make sense. I would also say thank you to Shindig for hosting us again today.
Amen.
Thank you to Brooke. Thank you to Brooke for jumping up on stage with us and asking a question. We appreciate that. For those that, if you're inclined, I encourage you to go check out the Imperative website. There's a bunch of resources and research there. Connect with Aaron. If you want to stay up to date on future webcasts, stop by my website, jasonlortzen.com. Sign up for the newsletter. That way you'll make sure that you'll get a personal invitation in your email box. We will be sending out a video of this conversation via email to all of those that are here today. So if you'd like to share it with others in your organization, do so. Go pick up a copy of this book. If you need to kind of get the conversation started in your organization, this is a great way to do so. It's a great read. It's really applicable and actionable stuff in here. So with that, I will say thank you, Aaron. Thanks for joining. Thank you, everyone, for making time, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.